recreate connections. Try to recreate some of the connections that we all have in person here. And we've heard from a lot of great folks. Today, we are really excited to have Jessica Cafferty and Dan Berger with us, and we'll introduce them in a moment. But first, I'd like to introduce my co-host, our partner in crime, the Executive Director at Trailhead, TM Rostigar.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. Yes, TM here, Executive Director at Trailhead, your friendly neighborhood startup incubator. For those of you who don't know us, pretty hard to get lost. We're down on 8th Street, also in the 8th Street Marketplace building, where we have Trailhead North. But yes, I'm really excited to get into this topic today. We have, as Nick said, two outstanding panelists who can speak to talent recruitment from a founder perspective. And I'm passionate about this topic because it's something my members bring to us on a daily basis. The topic of talent recruitment, the need for talent, the potential lack for talent, and just different ways of going about building company culture through talent. And so without further ado, I want to get right into this and just introduce formally Dan Berger. Dan is an American-Israeli entrepreneur and investor. He is the founder and former CEO of the DC-based Social Tables. It's a hospitality SaaS company, which was acquired by Vista-backed Cvent in 2018 for reported $100 million. Prior to Social Tables, Dan worked in management consulting and served as a member of Congress. Dan is currently writing a book and producing a documentary as he's building his next tech venture here in Boise. And I might add that Dan is also a member of Trailhead and somehow managed to occupy the much desired window office that everybody so wants at Trailhead North. And he's, like I've mentioned earlier on the call, he's officially joined the leadership team at Boise Startup Week as our third co-chair alongside Nick Krabs and myself. With that, Dan, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Great, yeah, I'll echo TM's sentiments. Welcome, Dawn, and it's my pleasure to introduce Jessica Cafferty. Jessica is the founder and CEO of Route Networking Group, a boutique recruiting agency that partners with companies all over the inland Northwest and helps them find their route to exceptional talent. Outside of RNG, Jessica also serves as the board chair of the Girl Scouts of Silver Sage, where she's leading that organization through a CEO transition. She's an active member of Idaho Business for Education and is a founding member of the Idaho Women in Technology. Born and raised in Boise, she took a brief Idaho hiatus to study business leadership, biology, and chemistry. That's an awesome combo you have there. At the University of Puget Sound, and spent subsequent years in sales and sales management for a third-party logistics company in San Diego and Dallas, Texas. She returned to Boise in 2015, joined Trailhead, and RNG was born. Those are the stories that we like to hear. So welcome, Jessica.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we will jump right into it. And we have about 50 minutes. As always, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. And please feel free to turn on your camera so we can see your smile, hopefully your smiling faces, but we can judge your reactions, how well we're doing. So our first question is for both panelists. So feel free to, whoever jumps in first, but both of you being founders, what do you look for in your employees? And maybe tell us about your top 2 or 3 qualities that you look for across the board in employees.
Don, you want to go first?
Oh, come on. By the way, I just realized you're running the search for the Girl Scout CEO position, and my dear friend is, I think, in the running for that. So we should talk afterwards.
Oh.
Yeah, like one of my closest friends is in the running for that.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to do everything you can to hire them so they'll move to Boise from DC.
So Don, why don't you highlight the 2 top traits of that person that you're thinking of?
So I think, look, I think that's a bit of a difficult question to answer. I think it depends on a lot of things. I think it depends on the stage of the business. Assuming everybody on the call is probably early stage and are probably past the founder stage, I would say I look for people who can have founding moments. In other words, people who can start your sales team, people who can start your marketing team, people who can start your engineering team. And throughout any venture's life cycle, you're going to have different stages and you're going to need different things. So I'm one of there aren't many, but I'm one of the few people who really didn't have a co-founder. In the startup I started, we oftentimes hear the story about, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, or Bill Gates and Paul Allen, or, what have you, but you really don't hear about single founders these days. And that's because most of the time you don't want to do something alone. So I had a co-founder very early on, and I did know what I was looking for. And we parted ways 6 months later. So as a result, I was an only founder for the remainder of the 8 years I ran Social Tables. But throughout that 8-year period, I looked for people who can have those founding moments I'm talking about. But that's a bit of a 30,000 foot level. If we're kind of on the runway and talking about what are the skills you're looking for, I would probably say, again, geographically is important, because what I've identified is in Boise and Idaho, people are a little older when they start their businesses. So if I'm on the East Coast, for example, I'm looking for somebody who's probably not going to do anything other than run the business. But given the fact we're in Idaho and where work-life balance is probably a little more important, maybe post-pandemic, that'll change on the coasts, but certainly won't change in Idaho, I don't think. But I'm looking for someone who can dedicate their entire life to the company. So the first and foremost is work ethic. And people call it grit, oftentimes the ability to hustle, whatever you want to call it, but this kind of completely committed to the venture. It's probably the first thing. And the second thing is I look for somebody who is complementary, not in terms of working style. I think it's actually important to have a similar working style. But I'm talking in terms of functionality. What I've observed is a lot of people start a business and then they're like, okay, I'll be CEO and you be COO. And why do you need a COO when you have 2 or 3 or 5 freaking people? I mean, most people can't even tell you what a CEO does at a 1,000-person company. It's usually a title that is, by the way, Sean Brown notwithstanding, since he's the COO of a company and he does a wonderful job. I see him on the call. There he is. Uh-oh.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm bigger than 3, so
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And you're a total generalist, so that's different. But most of the time, CO is kind of like a catch-all thing. So I would say you're probably looking for somebody who's got the functional expertise, the technical expertise, or the business expertise that you probably lack. Those are probably 2 things I would say.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that, I jotted down a couple of notes as you were talking, Dawn. And I think number one for me, when I'm hiring for my team, I'm looking for the first thing is resilience, grittiness, tenacity. I don't care how you label that. But, when you're working in a startup, as we all know, I mean, all of us on this call are probably familiar with the fact that like on any given day, your job is completely different or exactly the same as what you were hired to do. So, for me, having somebody that's adaptable and, doesn't look at me like I'm crazy when I'm like, hey, I need you to go downstairs and, box this person out of the parking space that they're in, as well as come back upstairs and start doing some recruiting and then, whatever other task might come up. I mean, I think that's just the nature of the startup. The other 2 big ones for me that I think Dawn alluded to as well, dependability. I think most founders in the startup realm, or I'd hope, I don't have time to micromanage. I don't have time to make sure if I tell you to do something, you do it. I don't have time to ask again and again and again. If I ask you to do something once, I'm really hoping and really just relying that you're going to do it. And so dependability is huge for me. And then the last piece of that is like taking that a step further and being self-driven and autonomous. Like, I feel like if I have asked you to do something once, then I'd hope that it becomes sort of like, oh, this is something she likes, or, I'm going to put myself in his or her shoes and have sort of some level of empathy for a founder, I think is another big part of that. And being able to sort of self-diagnose and self-forecast and say, hey, this is something that's relevant and relatable. I think a lot of times, I work on both sides of the realm, which is sort of interesting. I help companies hire, and then I hire myself. And then I work with candidates a lot too. So people that are job seekers and looking for jobs. And one of the things I talk to a lot of job seekers about And I think especially as they're starting to make or think about making a transition from big company to small company or a small startup, is the shift in your mindset has to be less about these are the tasks I'm given and this is what my job is, and more about how can I think more like a founder? How can I think more entrepreneurially and make this my own? How can I become vested in sort of what my job is?
I'll add two more things as Jessica's eloquent answer.
You only get two, Don.
So no, I have to. Oh, we gotta build. This is the next iteration. I was just gonna just
No, I wanna hear
coachability. I was gonna say coachability and effort. I remember I've at Social Tables when we exited, we had 140 employees, and my favorite people to hire were the people who just showed effort right from the get-go. People who sent like infographics as part of their job interview. People who send YouTube videos. People who wrote me. I had one person who wrote a letter to my dog of why they should be hired. Just that kind of like out of the box effort is awesome because they go out of their way than just sending a resume, and that shows that they're going to put an effort forth when they're there. So the level of effort super important in coachability. Because we're working so hard as founders and CEOs and operators and executives, we don't have time to mince words and kind of like make sure we say the nicest thing all the time. I'm an Israeli New Yorker, so that's even harder for me to say nice things all the time. So I need somebody who can be coachable and not take offense to everything I say, which is really hard these days, quite frankly.
I think there's a lot to unpack there, and a couple of threads. So I hear self-direction, and I also, something Don said earlier, the level of commitment. And I wonder, as a founder, especially in early stage, what is the founder's role in evangelizing and instilling the passion that the founder may have and has brought to the table to then, other employees and talent that is brought onto the company later. So, how much evangelizing, how much selling is on the founder internally to build sort of that commitment that you talked to earlier, Don?
Well, I think there's different types of founders, right? I mean, there's founders who are a little more operational and they're more kind of like processors or operators, and they're going to be in the weeds working on the systems and whatever else they're doing, the product. And then there's the founders who are out there and kind of like visionary, evangelizing the product, the business, becoming an employer of choice, all those things. My biggest weakness was that I would try to do both. And as a result, I was kind of like a jack of all trades and a master of none. And that was really difficult. I would go, speak at a conference and then come back to the office and tell people to hit their sales quota. Like, that's not a good look. So I struggled with that, for this 8 years I ran a business. I do think somebody has to be that role. It doesn't have to be the CEO, most likely the CEO, it doesn't have to be the CEO, but somebody's got to be there, be the face of the business, be an employer of choice, share the values of the business, share the vision of the business internally and externally as you recruit and scale.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is that, for me, one of the first things I did when I first started Route, actually before starting Route, is I read Guy Kawasaki's The Art of the Start. And if you are a founder yourself or you're thinking about starting a business, highly, highly recommend that book. Actually, I'm almost embarrassed to say, but that was the only book I read for like the first year of starting Route. But, here we are 6 years later. So I guess take that for what you will. But one of the things I really like about what he sort of dictates in that book is that, yes, you can start a company. Yes, you can start a company and make a ton of money and like have that be your main prerogative, priority. But it really, really helps when that company serves a grander purpose and helps society in some shape or form. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you're starting a nonprofit and, you're not you're giving all your money away or anything like that. But, I thought about that a lot when I started Route, and I still, and certainly I'm imperfect as well, but I still really try to interweave into every quarterly meeting with my team, every conversation we have where we get frustrated with the candidate that's being high maintenance, et cetera, and remind people like, hey, what we're doing is changing people's lives through their careers. We are helping people find careers that allow them to pay for their kids to go to college, to, go down the street and give back to the, city peanut shop and go to the coffee shop and like help build the economy here. And to me, that having that grander purpose and the ability to tie what we're building at Route to that really helps with that, that, I don't know, that culture and getting people bought in and sharing that passion. And I would say that it comes more naturally when there is that like interwoven truth to the business, rather than feeling like I got to be the preacher every Monday saying, all right, guys, I'm passionate about this and so should you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think, a lot of what you talked about touches on both like the words that are coming out of the leader's mouth, but also the actions behind those things. And I just, last week we were interviewing a candidate for an executive director position at a nonprofit, and she referred to being a chair mover is something she looks for and looks in herself. If you've ever been involved with a nonprofit, at every event, you got to set up the chairs and take down the chairs. And so she's looking for those people that, whether they're in the leadership position or, the receptionist, they're the first ones out and the last ones out there moving those chairs. And I think when you often have a leader who's talking about the importance of those things, but then is also physically moving the chairs, that's kind of message that resonates and builds culture.
The thing that comes to mind when you say that, Nick, is when you walk her through a hotel and you see whether any staff member picks up a piece of trash on the floor.
Yep.
When they're walking through the lobby or walking through the hallway. And honestly, if you're an employee and you're walking through my 30,000 square foot space, pick up a piece of trash, I'm going to talk to you about it because that's our shared space. And if you're not working to improve it, and then that means that that signals to me you're not committed. I'm very big on signaling, both from a leadership perspective and an employee perspective. And we signal all the time. There's that famous saying that half of life is showing up, and what that really means is you just got to be there and you got to be present. You got to be, you're always signaling. Whatever you think of our current president, he's always wearing a mask. And signaling that's important. The pandemic's still going on, regardless of where your position the mask is. So many times leaders just don't think about the simple things that they do or don't do.
Signaling whether you intend to or not is happening, right?
Yeah, when I worked for the congressman, one of the things I learned is that people remember who didn't go to the event more than they remember who did go to the event. And it's like, okay, then, and the same thing, like at employee events, I would see, are the same employees talking to each other all the time, or are they trying to seek out new employees? And if they're together talking to the same people all the time, they're going to hear something from me. By the way, lesson of this entire thing is you never want to work with me because I'm just a terrible person.
Hey, but it makes for a good discussion.
That's right.
I'm going to throw this next question to Jessica. Jessica, obviously in your business, you're recruiting people to your business and you're a talent recruiter, as you talked about earlier. And, I'm assuming a lot, if not most, or all of these folks are in Boise. So I'm just curious, your perspective on the talent pool in Boise, from both hats you wear, a talent recruiter and then a founder who's out looking for talent. Any insights that you would share without revealing your trade secrets or compromising any sensitive information?
Yeah, I think it really depends on sort of what audience you want me to kind of speak to here, because I think when you're a job seeker, when you're somebody that's like, hey, I'm out there, I'm looking for a new position, that environment feels very differently than when you're looking to hire, right? So if you're in a hiring manager or you're a founder looking for employee 5, 6, 7, whatever that may be. So I'll try to touch on both just to try to cover the basis here. But, Boise, at the end of the day, I feel very blessed to be here. I feel like we, on both sides of that aisle, you have, on the one hand, to me, I think Boise is one of the most accessible cities in the world. And I apologize if anybody else has heard me on other calls, because this is a drum I tend to beat a lot. But it's not just accessible because you can be in the mountains in 30 minutes, you can be in a lake at a lake in 30 minutes, you can be, you know, on a plane in 30 minutes. It's accessible because you can truly pick up the phone or get on LinkedIn and message a CEO, and you'll likely get a response. And if you do it right, if you play your cards right, you can probably get 30 minutes of their time and go to coffee with them. That is not true in any other major city that I've ever lived in. It just isn't. And so I think that from a job seeker's perspective, that is something that is like incredibly powerful, and that I highly encourage all of the candidates I talk to, utilize it. Especially for those that are sort of in that, I'm not sure what I want to do next. I mean, just go look on LinkedIn and find people that you might want to emulate, or that you're curious about their path, or you're, you want to work in food production, you're really interested in Albertsons, whatever that may be. On the other side of things, from a founder perspective, a hiring perspective, again, I can't help but think that Boise is, again, we're in a really great position. Number one, we all know the facts and figures about how fast Boise is growing. We know that people are moving here left and right. And one of the things I would say, one of the biggest shifts that's happened in the last year that I don't think people are talking about as much, but is that Boise's on the map. When I first started Route, I'd reach out to somebody in Seattle and I'd say, hey, I got a job for you in, Boise. I wondered if you'd be interested. And they're like, where? Huh? Like, are you kidding me? Iowa? No, I'm not moving to the Midwest, and now it's, oh yeah, I've heard about Boise. My cousin just moved there. I hadn't really thought about moving there myself, but I'm interested. And so I think from we get a lot of flack, and certainly it is true. We've got a little bit of a silver tsunami going on, and we've got a lot of folks moving here that are in that early retirement or later retirement phase, and that doesn't help the job pool by a whole heck of a lot. But what I will say is that that attention has been good from a Boise employer standpoint, because now, that silver tsunami, they've got kids, they've got nieces, they've got nephews, they've got whatever, siblings, and they're now sort of familiar with Boise. So I think that has really, really helped the job market. I mean, do we have gaps? Yes. My bio, we talked about Idaho Business for Education. Education is definitely something, in my opinion, not to get too political, but we got to get our act together. We need to be making investments to make sure that we can fill these jobs that we're producing, especially in technology. But I do think, I talk to a lot of founders early stage that are like, they kind of walk into the conversation already beat up and like, ugh, I know this is going to be a huge mountain to climb. I know I'm never going to be able to find a software engineer to save my life. And the reality of it is it isn't impossible. You just have to get creative. You're not going to be able to post your job on LinkedIn and get 50 candidates for a software engineering position. But I can tell you right now, 80% of the roles I fill are software engineering. We're able to do it and make money off of doing it. So
let's take that and apply that to early stage companies. So if you're an early stage company, I typically say that the first 5 hires are crucial, they're critical. How do you go about competing with other employers and standing out and getting your name out there and building that pipeline of talent? Any practical advice to early stage founders? I know you both have done it.
Yeah. Dawn, feel free to chime in here if you have immediate thoughts. My first thought is start early, start well before you think you need that first hire. And I know that's really challenging, but start having those conversations and treat it like a conversation. It doesn't need to be, hey, Matt, I'm interested in hiring you. Can you come have coffee with me because I want to hire you? It can be, hey, Matt, I'm early stage, I'm evaluating kind of my next couple of hires. Would you mind having coffee with me to explore, what I might be looking for in this person or in this role, right? Matt's far more likely to take that conversation than he is to be like, no, I'm happy at Trailhead. I don't want to go anywhere, right? So I think that's one thing, really phrasing it that way. We call it in my world, I call it build a bench, right? Build that bench of players so that when you are ready to hire, you've got the bench ready and you can go and tap them, rather than, starting from ground zero and feeling like, God, I gotta get somebody in here yesterday and I have nobody. So that would be sort of initial thoughts. Dawn, I'm sure you probably have others.
Yeah, I'm trying to just remember, like, back when we first started hiring. I think, look, I think the conversation today is probably different than it was just a year ago or a few years ago, given the kind of reality we're in and where we're going to go. I don't think if I was to build a, at Social Tables, we raised about $27 million across 5 rounds and, through a Series B. And, when we sold, we had 20 million in recurring revenue. So it's obviously resources are much bigger at that point than they were when we first started, and we had, our angel round with $500,000, and I wasn't taking a salary for the first 3 years. So, and back then it was just different, right? It was after the 08-09 recession, and it was DC, where there's arguably a bigger local talent pool. But I think the first question, before you even answer that question, Tim, is like, how do you go build about the early, recruiting early employees? Is think about the kind of company you're trying to run. One could make the argument that you probably want centers of excellence these days and tap into different economies depending on the talent pool they have. So if you want a sales team, you probably want to go to Provo, Utah. You want a call center for customer service, you probably want to Boise, Idaho. You want a highly technical, folks, you probably want to go fully remote. So I think it really depends on what you're trying to hire. And so that's the first thing, right? Is like, what are you trying to hire? And are you open to a fully remote, workforce? If I was building a business today, I'd probably do that. I'd probably have a hub and spoke model for offices, tap into the trailheads locally in every major city, and then spend my employee perk dollars, employee benefit budgets on quarterly events that bring everybody together, into these quarterly retreats, and I probably just go about it completely differently. So before I answer that question, Tim, I think it's important to kind of ask the question, is like, what kind of company am I trying to run in 2021 and beyond? Because we're essentially living 2030 and 2021. Everything, all the trends have been accelerated because of the pandemic. So that's probably the first question. Building a founding team, probably arguably still important to be in person. Everything past that, probably, the world's your oyster as far as what the workforce is going to look like. So that being said, I'll share our strategy. I was very anti-remote work. It took me 5 or 6 years to even allow engineers to work 1 day a week from home. I was very against it. Part of it is because our rent was $1.2 million a year. And I was like, we're leasing a 30,000 square foot office. Why in the hell should you be working from home? But that's so myopic, I look at that, I'm like, gosh, what was I thinking? But that was different, back then. So our strategy, much to Jessica's advice, is we build the bench through being thought leaders in terms of specific programming languages we used. So we were early to use React, early to use 3JS, which is a 3D modeling framework on the web. So we hosted those meetups. We became thought leaders in those areas in DC tech. So everybody knew that if you want to go hear the best talks on a monthly basis on those frameworks, on those topics, you go to an event sponsored by Social Tables. So we built the bench, as Jessica said, through being kind of the leaders of those niche affinity groups, and then people found out about us that way.
I'm really digging these non-traditional approaches to building the bench from both of you. And Don, you mentioned something that got my attention, and I was thinking of early stage companies. You talked about the benefit package. And also earlier we talked about this, this expectation of a deep rooted commitment to a venture. So I wondered to myself, early stage companies, as they make the first 5 or 10 hires, how would you consider the incentive of stocks, for example, or equity? And from a founder's, and I really want to get the founder's perspective on that from both of you.
So I'm really proud of having run an employee owned company. When we sold, we had over 200 rows in our cap table, our capitalization table. In other words, over 200 people, investors, founders, execs, and line employees all had stock. Everybody made money when I sold. I'm really proud of that. We created 4 millionaires out of the deal, and everybody, even people who were there for 6 months, got their stock accelerated for those 6 months. That being said, I am not sure how much, and so the flip side of that's a coastal approach, right? In Idaho, I can't think of a single employee owned stock company that's discussed. I mean, you guys probably know way better than me, but maybe there are a few, but the majority is non-employee stock, non-employee owned businesses. And most of the successes that I know of in the past half a decade that have been in the, 6-figure plus range, did not see employee-owned ownership. And quite frankly, I think that's an Idaho mentality. And I'm not saying it's bad or good. It is a kind of place where, you reap the benefits of the seeds you planted. It goes back to, I'm assuming the pioneering days of the state. So it's just a different mentality. But regardless of what the mentality is, I am not sure how, at least maybe folks, maybe millennials and Gen X, they're more amenable to stock these days. But I'd say Gen Z is probably not, because they see more value in $1,000 more a month than doing 1,000 shares per year, because there's, I forget what it's called, but there's this concept of like, money now is better than money later. And that's just a human nature. So I have not found stock to be as competitive as people like to think it is, or as, startup folklore tells us it is. That being said, I still think it's important, because I really think it's an executive's and a founder's job to put yourself at a level playing field with your workforce. And the only way to do that is to share the benefits of what you all build together.
Yeah, and I would just like comment on that. My team, I have a team of 8, so, and we'll always be a smaller team, but I work with a ton of startups, and I can sort of, like, from a very practical standpoint, from recruiting, I can tell you what people are attracted to and what they're not. And, I think there's kind of like 3 different tiers here. Like, number 1, the most ideal scenario for, especially when we talk about software engineers, because that's really, that's a huge part of a lot of our, startups problems are in that space, is number 1, you are competitive in terms of salary and pay and compensation, and you offer equity and incentives. That said, that's a really hard thing to do when you're in that first seed round, if you're, just getting started, employee number 3, 4. And so a lot of times what people fall into is that second piece of like, okay, we're maybe just under in terms of compensation. We're not super far under, and then we're also going to offer, incentives on top of that, options, et cetera. And then the last piece is like, well, we just can't afford, we're going to have to pay them, next to nothing, et cetera. We're really going to make up for it on the options piece. And I guess there'd be 4, the last being that you just pay people competitively and then you don't give them any options. In my experience, engineers, they, even in Boise, it's not the Bay, but they have enough experience to know options are just that, they're optional. They don't necessarily, that doesn't mean there's cash in your pocket. It means there could be one day, if you're working for Dawn, you could wake up in 10 years and, you might have some cash in your pocket, but they know that that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen. And so there are, I've seen, and it totally spans the gamut. I don't want to overgeneralize, but I would say, about 50-50, right? 50% of the engineers I talk to are like, okay, yeah, I'm willing to take that. Or, no, I'm not. I really need to see it in my compensation to make up for it. The biggest thing I can say is just be transparent about that from the get-go. Where people really end up getting burned from a startup perspective and from a hiring perspective is when they enter into the conversation and just candidly, they walk in and it's like, oh yeah, swag, swag, swag. We're going to hire you. We got the best company. And then you get into an offer stage and they're like, oh, by the way, here's your offer. It's for $70K, even though you're making $170 now. And oh, we're going to throw some options in there. But that's where like shit just like doesn't pan out, as you can imagine, because engineers like, what the hell? Why did you just string me through this process and make me feel like you were going to, make me this competitive offer when you don't have the funds to do it? So, my biggest thing is be transparent from the get-go. That very first conversation, yes, it can be uncomfortable to talk about money, but let them know where you're at. Then you don't end up wasting your time, you don't waste their time, and you get a real sense and feel for like, is this even worth, moving forward? All in all, I'm happy to hear Dawn. It's funny. I was like chuckling to myself thinking, I'm glad he spoke first, because I was about to come out guns a-blazing being like, you better offer equity to your people, because I inherently believe that. A lot of my clients, that we work with, practice that same philosophy. I think that if you're going to build a startup, you want people that feel invested, and the best way for them to feel invested is to be invested, and have some skin in the game. And, I think a lot of people are way more excited about an opportunity where they know they're working towards something. And they've, like I said, they've got, that skin in the game to be able to kind of like get a nice little payout for it if it does end up working out. So
I'll add two things. The first thing is, I learned this way too late, but people don't do a really good job explaining the total compensation package. And what that means is, and literally walking through people on the offer letter or whatever it is, or even, conversationally, as Jessica mentioned, okay, your base is this, your options are valued at this at the last fair market value. So your base just went up from 70 to 90. We give you benefits that are equal. Now, Jessica may disagree with this, but I really like to push the envelope. We give you benefits that are equal $10,000, your healthcare, the coffee, the swag, all that's $10,000. And then the vacation because we give you 2 more weeks of vacation, that's this much. And I really like to really bring the entire total compensation package to life, and not just kind of be like, okay, your base is this, and by the way, you have all this other stuff. You have to quantify from a dollar perspective all the different perks and bennies you're offering, and to give people a true sense of what the compensation looks like. Additionally, a lot of startups don't do this until way too late, until they have institutional investors, in giving people bonuses. And bonuses play a really important role in getting everybody to row in the same direction. So, and bonuses can go all the way down to line employees, doesn't matter. Everybody, it's another way to share the, the benefits and rewards of success. So if we close this $1 million deal, everybody's going to get this bonus. We had a quota, whatever. Like, give those bonuses on a quarterly basis to incentivize people further, from the executive all the way down.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about, Don, is just aligning incentives, right, across the board, right? And to touch on something you said earlier, and I think, Jessica, you were alluding to a bit as well, is I think, by reputation, Boise has not been a community that has had a lot of equity sharing, so to speak, all the way down the line. And I think culturally that's changing here. And I think that you'll see, a lot of the companies that are doing well, and hoovering up a lot of the great talent in Boise, they're forcing hands, right, to say, well, if we're competitive from a salary standpoint and we're offering equity for the employees, it's really not that hard of a decision, right? And I think that's an interesting thought too, Dawn, of giving that basically the full cost to the company of having an employee. And then I think, alluding to your earlier comments, an employee starts thinking like a founder, right? Of here's what each of us costs. Here's the the total cost that the company is incurring for having me on board.
And a lot of that goes back to how transparent is the business. So many businesses just don't share the P&L, right? So many businesses don't share their monthly revenues. I mean, Yahoo did this when Marissa Myers, one of my favorite CEOs of all time, did this. She published the board of directors deck to the entire company at Yahoo. We did the same thing. I mean, we sanitized a little bit, but we shared our board deck, the board of directors deck, to the entire employee base, and published a memo on what happened during that meeting. Because what happens after a board meeting, right? Everybody sees the board of directors meeting in that glass conference room. They're wondering, oh, what went on over there? There are going to be cuts, because decisions are made at the board level. So if transparency is one of your, it's a really cliche value, but find a way to, that's authentic to you, right? But if you find a way to make transparency authentic and you live it, then there's less guesswork and gossip around what's actually happening. And you can have a lot of fun with this. At All Hands, we play different exercises where we'd actually make employees figure out, okay, how much does it cost us? How much does each square foot here bring us in revenue? Or, what's the actual cost of every employee? And let people, part of your job, right, is to give your employees financial literacy and business literacy. And so we would have explain people what equity means. And most people don't even know what options mean. The option is the right to or the right to not purchase stock at a certain agreed upon price. People don't even know what options mean. They just accept this stuff willy-nilly. So educating people on what all these things mean is part of our responsibility as operators and executives.
Yeah, and just a quick story even that I can share. Recently I was working with a startup client, and they tried to attract or recruit this like really high level, awesome architect candidate. And we get all the way to the end of the process. They make him an offer, and it's on the compensation side a little bit low. And then they say, oh, well, here are all these options. And didn't talk to him about what they were, any of that. And, I think they were like, here's, I forget, like $20,000 or $20,000 in options. And the candidate, being that he had some, familiarity and having worked with us, we were like, you need to find out what those are. What does that mean? He goes and uncovers, oh, well, they've already released 2.2 million in options. And so they're offering you 20,000. And that essentially, as you all can imagine, is negligible, especially when, they're claiming it to be, a $20,000 equivalent, when in reality, their price is about, 20 cents to the dollar right now. So those are really important. I really love that you said that, Don, because I think that that's an incredibly important part of recruiting and providing a great candidate experience. And you're right, like educating people. Frankly, I would hesitate as a founder to want to have somebody on my team that early stage that A, didn't know to ask those questions, or B, didn't have enough, familiarity to be able to, educate themselves. So I think that that's a great point. Needless to say, the candidate did not accept the offer.
Sorry, that's me.
My main takeaway from that, in terms of a practical approach, which ties back to the things we're talking about earlier, is that total compensation package. Because as I listened to both of you earlier, depending on the phase, depending on the role, you may want to attract folks who respond differently to certain incentives. And I think as a founder, if you build in that flexibility and you understand what's motivating one kind of person versus another, you don't just come out with, a recruiting approach. And I'm assuming that you do, as an early stage founder, have the flexibility to maybe move 5,000 from the PTO and add it to the options, just depending on what drives people there.
Totally. Yeah. And, I think another big thing and part of this that, many of us, I think, already know is just don't be afraid to get creative with your benefits. I can fully understand. I was a bootstrapped startup, emptied my 401k to start my business. So I know what it's like to not have the cash, right? And I think, I was able to attract people because I was willing to be super flexible with them on their hours. I was willing to give them, unlimited paid time off. I was willing to, make investments in them and training and other sorts of like any other classes they wanted to take. Let's see, what are the other things that we just tried to work on? I wouldn't set goals for myself, and I would be super transparent with them around, hey, by Q2 of 2018, we're going to have medical benefits, and you guys help hold me accountable. And then we did. And then, right now we're working on, adopting a 401k with a match. And, that's a big lift for a business owner. It's super expensive. And I'm like, okay, but I told you I was going to do it, so I'm going to do it. So, things like that, I think, really go a long way in helping to attract candidates, and also just to keep them on board so that they know, okay, yeah, they're sticking their neck out too. So, I've talked with a lot of different, companies around that. The other kind of benefits that I know some of my clients do, like, gym reimbursements and, just paying out of pocket and giving them a stipend for their medical benefits, so that they can, pay. They can go onto the exchange. I had a client that was like, they were willing to pay for, like, they gave everybody a bike when they first, came on board, things like that. So, you can get creative. What?
So Idaho.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And 2 years ago, Don, you heard that and thought like, with bike, I thought they'd give you a horse in Iowa, right?
Yeah.
Now you're here and you
Well,
know.
I mean, now you can, I mean, if you're having fun with it, you can say, okay, we'll give you $2,000 towards your home office.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, again, like cater it to whatever, but on a 401k match, funny enough, we had it and then we had to cut it. That was really hard. So we had a match and we had to cut it. And that didn't go over well.
Yeah.
But look, I want to just take a different approach real quick on this conversation, because there's also the point of running a business and us as founders and us as operators, driving our people as hard as we can for as little money as possible. Because that's what we got to do, right? We're trying to have the right margins. We're trying to have you're trying to meet the rule of 40, right? Where your gross margins and your growth rate equal 40% or more, whatever, or profit margins and your growth rate. We are running businesses. And if you can get away with that offering a 401k, fantastic, do it. If you can get away with cutting people's salary, do it. That is your fiduciary responsibility to your investors. That is your responsibility to create enterprise value. And, we haven't even talked about offshoring and all the possibilities there. I mean, when we got bought by Cvent, they run around saying they have 4,000 employees, but guess what? 3/4 of them are in India, and they run a 24-hour work cycle where they have 3 shifts, a hybrid, a morning and an evening. So there is a lot of opportunities, and the average salary is 10K as opposed to 80K in the United States. So there's just there's also that whole part. We're talking about very employee friendly, but as you bring on venture capital, as you bring on private equity, that's when stuff gets nasty, man. And that's where, you don't have the benefit of being a sole proprietor or being a majority owner and all those things. And you realize a lot of talent is, quite frankly, commoditized. And that's an unfortunate truth in today's ruthless business environment. That being said, I don't think that's the way to lead. And I don't think that's how you build, the right kind of business, but depending on your desired outcome is what you need to optimize for.
That's a good reality check. I appreciate that.
Yeah, agreed. I think, you're reacting to the situation you find yourself in, right? And if your business needs to reduce your 401k match or eliminate it, you do what's right for the business, right? You take, some of that short-term pain and you ask your employees to bear with you, and there may be a big benefit at the end of that challenging road.
It's all puts and takes, right? So the worst thing you can do is offer things that your employees don't give a shit about. How many times does that happen? Like, you think employees care about this, you give it as a benefit, nobody uses it. And then you're like, well, we do this. Well, I don't care about that. Why'd you even offer it to me? So I think it's really important to be contextual to the kind of people you're hiring.
Yeah, the Coke machine, and no one drinks Coke. So
exactly.
But
if you drink Pepsi, I don't want you to work for me.
We got a few questions in the chat, you guys. I know we're running out of time, so maybe we can squeeze in a couple of questions from the audience.
Yeah,
how is it already 1? What the hell is happening?
Just having a good time.
Time warp.
Time flies. First question is from Eva, and she said, in post-COVID work world, which key positions do you think can now be remote that may not have been before? HR ops admin roles, and what might be a good way of handling requests by existing key employees?
Well, I'll take a stab at the kind of my initial reaction here. I think ultimately, the answer to your first question is, I think that we've seen that really any role can be remote. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean that you want it to be, but it can be. I think it's going to be company contingent. What's important to you, and what I think it all even ties into, like, what's the culture that you're looking to build for your team, and how do you want to build it? Because that also plays a huge part in this remote discussion. If you like the idea of having a remote team and you get together once every quarter or whatever it may be, and you build that rapport that way, or you do Zoom happy hours and you have a team that's dispersed across the country, then, why not have your entire team be dispersed, and be remote? it's funny, we host a CTO luncheon every quarter, and one of the topics that we talked about is related to your second piece of that. And that's, all right, we've been working remote for a year now, and now you got to go back to the office. And, especially on the engineering front, I think a lot of engineers are very comfortable being at home and, behind their computer and their monitors and, maybe having one or two interactions a day with other employees. And, a lot of our CTO friends and clients are like, oh crap, I got to get these guys back into the office, or these gals back into the office. How am I going to do that? And I think, one of the things I think is going to happen, and that most of our clients are talking about, is that it's not going to be 5 days in the week, it's 5 days in the office. If you have the ability to be flexible and do 3, I think you're gonna see a lot more longevity in your employees than not. Especially now, I'm seeing a ton of, especially in the engineering world, but across the board, I'm seeing a ton of candidates really loving the idea of being remote and wanting to stay that way. And so a good way to compete, especially if you're trying to compete against like somebody that's based down in the Bay Area and going to pay you 30% more, is to say, hey, we have an office, which is really awesome because you can come in, you can meet people, you can interact, you can have that rapport. And by the way, you can also work from home. And you can spend 2 days a week and, feeling like you don't have to, get dressed up or whatever it may be that kind of causes you pain of coming into the office. So I think that those are kind of things. For me personally, for my business, I ask my team, I say, I'd like for you guys to be in the office 2 days a week. I don't care what days those are. I don't care how long. I don't care any of that, but I want to see your faces 2 days. And I want other people to have that same opportunity to see your face and just sort of build that, that rapport. We set up meetings like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right at the beginning of the day, as like sort of check-ins that help, our team connect. And I'm very purposeful in allowing time to just talk. We don't dive right into business. It's like if they want to talk about the weekend, they want to talk about whatever, really try to do that and allow that opportunity. And in doing so, I think it's also having that regular cadence of meetings has created a bit of a natural, like, hey, I'll go into the office since we have that meeting on Monday anyway. So just a couple of quick thoughts there. Hopefully that gets into some of your question.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I just, Jessica's comments made me really think about, I think that the role of the job has really changed over the last year. In the American identity, the work has played such an important role in defining who we are. I come from places where the first question is, what do you do? And I think that, first of all, I can't imagine the anxiety. I'm just getting chills thinking about it, that people might be experiencing, thinking about going back to the office for the first time in a year. That's so scary. What are people going to think about me? How have I changed? How do I look? What am I into? What am I not into? I don't want to see people it's scary. That's so scary. I'm just getting anxious thinking about it. And so I think that post-pandemic, the role of the job is not going to be as pivotal as it used to be to defining our identities. And hopefully that means we get definition of our identities from other places, like the people we spend time with and the things we do for fun and the communities we choose to interact with. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't really have, so the belonging we get from work, at social tables, everything was pink and bleeding pink and, whatever. Like, I don't think people give a shit about that anymore because they realize what's important to them over the past year. And they realize the job is usually a means to an end. We talked about ways of combating that earlier, but that's still what it is. And that's changing and we still don't know what it's going to look like. So I have nothing else to add to what you said though.
Survive to Thrive is getting deep. I like it. Philosophical.
It is amazing how much we've been able to run this world from working remotely. I mean, iPhones are still being released on a September schedule. Things are still being done. It's amazing. And, they say that at least 14% of the workforce will stay remote forever. Salesforce just announced they don't have to go back to work. So we'll see what happens. It's crazy and fascinating.
Yeah, it is changing. A couple other questions in the chat that I want to make sure we get to. Someone alluded to some of the qualities that you talked about in the first question, resilience and those other things, soft skills. How do you assess for those? What do you do?
Is that Sean's question? No.
No, that is Marina's question.
So I can walk you through the interview process. First of all, my favorite book on hiring is called Who. It's by Jeff Smart, and I forgot the second guy's name. It's basically the message behind it is it's not about what you do. It's not about what you do. It's about who you hire, whatever the subtitle is. But that's where we got most of our interview tactics from. They do something called the top grading interview for executives, which is basically walking through somebody's entire background in a day. It's 6 hours and it's really intense, but it's really good, especially if you ask the right follow-up questions. They call it getting curious and constantly asking, why'd you do that? Really understanding how people think. But the way we did it at Social Tables is we had two, there's obviously different roles, had different kind of barriers to entry, different and have different ratios of, application to interview to hire. But we had we did panel interviews. I like panel interviews more than one-on-one interviews because you get multiple perspectives. Everybody filled out the same form. And we had a functional interview panel and then a culture interview panel. The culture interview existed of people from the company. The questions were curated from the HR team and others. And basically we asked everybody the same questions because that way you can compare the different answers. A lot of open-ended interviews don't allow you to compare and contrast answers, which is why I'm a big fan of structured panel interviews. And also gives employees buy-in on hiring folks. And there's veto, right? So you have a panel, the panel meets at the end, then you vote. If there's one veto, there's a way to override it, but generally one veto means the person doesn't get hired. And that requires at least 6 plus manager, so 7 votes. And there's just ways to ask that, you can do case interview, or you asking, situational. You can ask, tell me about a time. So it's, kind of looking at their past work experience. You can ask directly, scale questions. I like scale questions. Because you can kind of gauge where people are. So it really depends. But so for example, let's just take one of coachability, right? It's like, you can really fuck with people. I really don't like the way you walked into the office this morning. And see how they react. If you're trying to see how coachable they are, they say, oh, really? Tell me more. Why didn't you like that? Or like, oh, if they get defensive. So how they're going to react. So, so I'd say the framework would be, number 1 is set up your interview process. Number 2 is figure out what you're testing for. Ideally, it aligns with your values. And number 3, come up with the questions that test for that through a group process that has some level of meritocracy.
Yeah, and for the sake of time, I just echo those remarks. The last thing that I would just say is the mistakes I've made in hiring have usually been because I tried to rush through a hiring process and I skipped steps in a hiring process I had built. And that always bites me in the ass. And so I tell clients all the time, build an interview process, know what it is, and then stick to it. Don't say, oh, this person has an offer on the table and I need to hurry up and make them an offer, or I'm going to lose them, or, they seem to be really awesome. And you know what? I'm going to skip this last section. Don't do that. Stick to your interview process, whatever that process may be that you've developed. And I'd agree, Top Grading, it's a great book. If you are uncomfortable interviewing, you don't know where to start, it's a great book to start at. And then it sounds like, Don, I haven't read Who, but it sounds like you use Top Grading. So that's another great resource.
Yeah, I hate interviewing. I mean, I hate interviewing. So I realized way too late I shouldn't be interviewing. And we had I interviewed everybody. And like that, going back to signaling, which we started with, everybody went through a 50-minute interview with the same exact questions. And I think I vetoed one person out of the 400 or so people I've interviewed. But I hate interviewing. I hate this long interviews. I just wasn't good at it. I multitasked when I was doing it. I wasn't good at it. So if you're not good at it, find somebody who is and make sure you trust them.
Reach out to a recruiter.
Yeah, we've worked with a recruiter.
There's free advertising here.
Actually, speaking of recruiters, I want to just say recruiters. I did not use recruiters as much as I should have, and recruiters are so long as they as incentives are aligned and you like the way that, you know, you're going to compensate them, recruiters, especially for technical roles, hard to fill roles, executive roles, management roles, are really, really good resource, because we're limited by our networks and recruiter, you know, and I like to say that just like, you know, the best candidates are usually not seeking. So you got to work recruiters to do the work and get you the best possible candidates. And, you know, that's what we did for some really important roles and got us very far. I love working with recruiters.
One last question. Sean has stuck it out with us, so we want to make sure we get to his question. What are the biggest gaps between attractive places to work and not, or unattractive places to work? Interview process, compensation, packages, anything that we may be missing here? What are those differences?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this. So I think, Sean, hopefully the talk around compensation was sort of there already. I'd happy to kind of dig into that. You know, one of the big things I would say is transparency. It continues to be something that's like just super important to candidates. You know, if they feel like they're getting like, you know, the whatever that saying is, gauze pulled over their eyes, they typically know, and you know, they get a bad gut feeling and it just doesn't work. And I would say that also comes into play, like frankly, if you're not transparent in an interview process, then you get into a company and a role. Can you imagine what that how much different that role is than what you were told or led to believe? And so I think that's a big part of it.
I mean, what does it signal?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'm trying to think of like examples for you of like recent experiences. You know, I think at the end of the day, if a company isn't agile, they aren't flexible, they aren't willing to sort of adapt with the times. That's another big thing that we're seeing a lot of candidates that are like, hey, you know, you won't let me work remote 1 day a week, or you won't let me work, you know, remote 2 days a week. I'm going to go move somewhere else because I have the ability to do that. And, you know, like I can't be punching a time clock every day, all day. I need to be able to pick up my kid from school when he's sick or whatever it may be. I think that has been that's a big thing that's coming up for a lot of candidates. You know, just a general prioritization of people, you know. I don't think anymore that somebody is just like willing, or a lot of the candidates I talk to, especially of the newer generations, they're not willing to just sacrifice like, hey, this is my work and I'm going to work hard. And, you know, I know that this is separate from my life. At the end of the day, I think these newer and up and coming generations, they see work and life as being one and the same. And, you know, employers that embrace that and sort of realize that are able to kind of retain that talent much better than employers that are, nope, leave your life at home. Nope, I don't care about the kid. Nope, I don't care about the whatever issue you got going on. And then, you know, I think that gets into my point, which is a great, you know, full circle spin, is just like having a level of empathy, you know, just as much as the employee needs to have empathy for the founder has got to have empathy for the employee and understand that, you know, life happens, and that your dog dies, or, you know, your kid gets sick, or, you know, you can't make a meeting you've been promised that you'd make because some, you know, your fiance's brother from Parma calls. I just had that happen last week. And it's like, you know what, like in the scheme of life, that's not important. So I don't know, just having a level of understanding and empathy, I think has a big part of like attraction. Other tactile things, one thing that I just recently have been working with a client on is looking at your gaps within compensation. So if your lowest paid employee is paid, I forget what the rule of thumb is, but I think it's like 3x, or is it, if the gap is greater than 3x between your lowest employee and your highest employee, that's not typically a good sign. So, and they do that, I know for sure, on when you're like looking at getting like your B Corp certification, that's the metric that they measure. And I could be wrong on that 3X, so forgive me if I am. But that's one thing that we're working with some clients on right now is, okay, you pay a customer service representative $15 an hour, but you pay your highest paid employee $250. That's a big discrepancy. Yes, the workload is different, but that's something to consider. And it ultimately it ends up, people find out. If you think that people don't talk about their salaries, they do. So just some general thoughts.
And just to add to that, I found myself in that situation where there was 2 offers, all else equal. And I know some people dropped this in the chat. The things that stood out to me when all else was equal was the people and the culture, how they made me feel. And I recall walking up for one of the offers, walking up to my workstation. They were showing, this is pre-COVID, this is where you would work. And I distinctively recall going, no, I won't. I don't see myself here. This is not conducive to what I want to do. And so I think it's, oftentimes those intangible things, the way, people make us feel, and culture is one way of sort of nailing that. And I know people drop that in the chat as well, work culture.
Great. Well, I know we're over time, so I appreciate
Quick plug to builtinidaho.org. If you haven't checked it out, it's the best resource in Idaho for entrepreneurs.
Cool. Thank you for that. TM, anything to plug from the Trailhead side, upcoming events? I know we have Idea Set Go kicking off in April.
Yeah, Idea Set Go is kicking off in April. Thank you for that. With Jeff Reynolds, we had our info session. Lots of interest is being drummed up out there in the community. I think it's going to be a full cohort. So yeah, thank you for letting me do that shameless plug. But other than that, just to join in on shout out to Matt, and also, yes, check out builtinidaho.org. Matt just dropped that into the chat for everyone.
Cool. Shameless plug on my part as well. Next Wednesday afternoon at 4 o'clock, we'll have the Idaho Entrepreneur Challenge. The finalists will be pitching on a live stream. I will make sure that we send a follow-up email to everyone who attended with all of these links, Built in Idaho and Idea Set Go and IEC. But I appreciate you all joining the conversation today. And thank you to Dawn and Jessica. This was really fun. And yeah, I picked up a lot of good information to take with us on our journeys, good reading and tips for hiring. And we will see you all next time, hopefully one of these days down at Trailhead as well.
Jessica, check your DMs.
Okay, deal.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.